Is it finally time to start the They Did Me Dirty arc? Because it's starting to seem like it. We got the patron request from Puffy. They say you complain about how they write characters like Nezha despite who they are. Fair argument. So like how you exposed Type Moon for writing Theon to be a fraud, why not do it for Nezha and or Lubu? You should even go into detail about how you would write them in terms of power scaling, characterization, and personality in Fate if you had the chance to write them. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. So we're gonna leave forward with the topic on Nezha. And for the people that haven't been around, we did cover Nezha on the channel years ago. I'm talking way back in 2018. Hard to believe it's been that long. And the lore itself was more so of a highlight. So this time around, we're gonna do more of a deep dive. Ever since I got into Nezha's lore, it was always odd to reach the introduction of the character in the story, because it felt so lackluster. And we're going to get into the original text, that being the Investiture of the Gods, so you can kind of see what I mean. The Investiture of the Gods, a 16th century Chinese novel and one of the major Chinese works in the gods and demons genre, written during the Ming Dynasty. The work combines elements of history, folklore, mythology, legends, and fantasy. The story is set in the era of the decline of the Shang dynasty and the rise of the Zhou dynasty. And this of course is where Nezha's story primarily comes from. Looking at Nezha's birth, Li Jing was in a strange situation. His wife was seemingly pregnant for over 3 years and 6 months, but never progressed into labor. She suddenly gave birth to this strange child, that being in the form of a ball of meat. Li Jing immediately rushed forth into her room and cleaved into a strange and fleshy ball that rolled to and fro across the floor. Within the ball emerged a small young child with hair as white as snow, with a gleaming gold bracelet on his right wrist. And I want to take into that right away. Nezha's appearance. As you guys know, and as the story tells you, Nezha was originally a boy. And not only that, but a boy with snow white hair. If you look at the depiction in FGO, it's nothing like this. And the reason primarily is that the story is talking about his pre-reincarnation version, and Fate is using his post-reincarnation. The hair is brown instead of the original white, and they actually appear in the form of a female instead of a male. In the case of being a gender bend, in Nezha's case, there's no reason for this to be here, and that really takes away from one of the many great male figures that we could have had. And you know, the whole reason that they did this was to sell the character through their appearance, which becomes doubly offensive when you realize that they failed miserably. The other thing that I want to address is the pregnancy itself. Now, I already said how strong Nezha was supposed to be, which you'll continue to see as we get through it, but just the pregnancy alone, being carried for 3.5 years and coming out of his mother skipping the infancy, automatically gives you a sense of superiority in his design. In any circumstance where Nezha is involved in the story herself, it doesn't necessarily feel like that at all. As a matter of fact, it seems like the story goes out of its way to hype up everybody else instead of Nezha, especially in LB3. Yeah, you have some people that are more familiar with her background, like Da Vinci, gassing her up in conversation, but we hardly get to see that from Nezha outright. Every time Nezha shows up, she more so feels like random character in the background number 4, which is also a shame. And this problem goes all the way back to Salem. I feel like Nezha shouldn't have been there. It's the Salem witch trials. Why did you put Nezha there? You could have put literally anybody else. Like, I don't know, a witch. Just put her on the same level, give her actual dialogue, and have her function in the same way for different reasons. Nezha did not have to be there. So the problem for sure already starts there, because this isn't our first impression of the character. We already have a preconceived notion of Nezha being lackluster from Salem. So going into LB3, people aren't even looking for Nezha to be good, which makes no sense because it's literally the Chinese Lost Belt. You literally have historical and domain priority. I will say I do like the way that Nezha is designed. I'm not the biggest fan of her third ascension. I feel like parts of it is really tacky, but in terms of appearance, it's clean. It would have been clean even if it wasn't Nezha. It's just kind of strange that it was. As the fairy primordial arrived shortly, the former took hold of the child and declared his name to be Nezha. After containing consent, that primordial could adopt the child as his own disciple. After his 7-year nurturing under the fairy primordial, Nezha arrived before the 9-bed river, and when he took a bath in it, he immediately took his clothes off and used the sky-budding damask around his neck to wipe his body. Each time this scarf touched the water, the surface turned red and the ground beneath it shook violently, which, as you can see, immediately causes an earthquake wherever she puts it down. And she does have her sash in Fate, but you'd never know. Never really do anything with it. Now, I can see Fate making the separation between her base form and her reincarnation, so I'm not gonna make it that big of a deal. That makes sense, especially considering that we are trying to make her summonable and not an actual threat to humanity. But I just wanted to put into the air that there is a lot more to her character that never gets addressed, and you wouldn't really know that just by looking at Fate. Guang, the Dragon King of the EC, thus ordered his Yaksha 6 scout Li Gan to find out the cause to each consistent tremors. After realizing Nezha to be the source of these tremors, Li Gan lashed his axe out violently at the former in great rage, but only ended up losing his life shortly by Nezha's universal ring. In other words, Nezha clapped him. And I mean literally one shot at this man. Mind you that Nezha is still 7 years old. If you look at the level of this commander, that being the Yaksha, the Yakshas are a broad class of nature spirits connected with water, fertility, trees, the forest, treasure, and wilderness. On one hand, a Yaksha may be an inoffensive nature fairy, but there's also a darker version of the Yaksha that haunts the wilderness and waylays and devours travelers. Now, after coming off the back of LB6, it should be fairly apparent how high the scale can get for a fairy level spirit. And this is essentially a Chinese equivalent, somebody of that stature. He one-shots a Chinese fairy at the age of 7. And I will give credit to Fate for giving Nezha the universal ring because her Fate counterpart does have that. But you would never know how powerful this armament actually was in the story because it's never pointed out to be as such. It's kind of just there. Albing eased his father with word that he would find out the reason for such an action. Experiencing great ridicule and arrogance upon the meeting of Nezha, Bing lashed forward his great renowned Lance of Jade. However, using both his legendary items with synchronized ability, Nezha managed to strike the former dead, who thus returned to his original form, a silver dragon. Oh, what do you know? Within minutes, Nezha has clipped a fairy and a dragon as a child. And to be honest, he doesn't even know what's going on. Remember, he's just there to take a bath. So he's getting assaulted by people at the random. They're ambushing him and they're getting dropped. When Nezha appeared before the Dragon King and apologetically handed him his third son's tendon that was previously ripped out, the former flew into greater contempt, declaring fully that he would personally see the Jade Emperor to ensure their punishment. Feeling fully responsible for the great agony and frustration that his mother and father were now going through, Nezha declared that he would see his master, the Fairy Primordial, to see how he should deal with the Dragon King to ensure his family's safety. Again, which would be a further nod to Nezha's compassion, which we don't nearly get to see enough. Using a dust cloud to move with great speed through the air, Nezha arrived shortly before his master's residence. Boom! Once again, you see it, this man literally had his own Nimbus. And granted, the reincarnation had the flame wheels, but this is really good information to put in the bio or even in the backstory that Nezha should be mentioning herself. Whoop-de-woo, I used to have my own dust cloud before I got these wheels. Something of that nature. You would never know. The fairy primordial first drew invisibility charms on Nezha and then sent him to the virtue gate of the celestial palace. So from that, we know that Nezha is supposed to have invisibility. You get in the story, no invisibility, which is also a shame because that's not really used that often. There's quite a few servants that should have invisibility and they don't. Lancelot and Siegfried come to my mind right off the bat, and she's just one of them. As the Dragon King eventually arrived through the gate, he rode swiftly towards the South Celestial Gate, determined indeed to see the Jade Emperor at once. Yet realizing that such a gate was closed, a large pain suddenly erupted forth in his back as Nezha's universal ring landed a crucial blow to the former, falling to the ground with Nezha grabbing a hold of his neck. As Nezha toppled about the Dragon King and began beating him violently with his fist, the latter became even more infuriated. Nezha tore apart each individual scale upon his sides, effectively forcing the king to give in to such detriment. After Guon had been ordered to take form of a small lizard lest he attempted to escape, Nezha returned immediately to Shintang Pass in mere moments. So this gives a nod to the fact that Nezha doesn't even need the weapons. He's out here choking out the Dragon King and forcing him to run away by beating him into submission. So in a situation where Nezha in the story possibly could even give up her spirit to somebody that would need it more, that could also be a thing because she's known for doing that. Nezha goes back to his domain. He soon became rather bored and decided to climb the neighboring pass's watchtower to enjoy the afternoon breeze. Nezha then picked up a bow equipped with a set of 3 arrows that sat at the edge of this large tower. Deciding to better his archery technique, he shot one of the 3 arrows into the southwest. Truly, Nezha little did realize that this bow was wielded by none other than Emperor Xuanyuan within the pass, for only one of the immortal ability could have the strength to wield it. With even greater misfortune, this arrow happened to pierce the throat of Blue Cloud Lad of Whitebone Cave. This is yet another armament that we see him obtain, though I will say that since he's not actually in the archer class, I will give them some leeway for that. As such, an incident was immediately informed to Lady Rock, the mistress of the cave. The latter vowed to attain revenge against Li Jing, and of course this is Nezha's father, who is also a general himself and has his own list of abilities. He's getting thrown into all these different things because of Nezha's doing, and he's trying to dispel them because of course Nezha's a child and he himself has nothing to do with it. As Li Jing called for Nezha and shortly realized that he was indeed the criminal behind this new incident, the former led Nezha to Skeleton Mountain atop a dust cloud. The secondary disciple of Lady Rock approached Nezha to call him to the cavern. Nezha determined this to be the perfect chance to knock the former out cold due to the calamity that should befall him in a very short time anyways. Seeing her disciple near death on the ground, Lady Rock began to lash her sword at Nezha in even greater rage. Unfortunately for Nezha, his legendary items were absorbed into the former's sleeves with ease when he attempted to unleash them, and thus he had no choice but to flee immediately to his master, the Primordial. After yelling profusely at the fairy Primordial in her desire to confront Nezha, the latter retorted by saying Nezha is destined to perform such calamities, and such an incident was only minor and of no real significance compared to his true future performance. So the fairy Primordial, the person that came to Nezha's mother in a dream while she was pregnant and basically assured his birth, he already knows what Nezha is capable of, and all of these things that he's doing is just a part of the program. Him losing his weapons, him learning these lessons, him committing these calamities were all a part of his character that would lead into later. The reason that this is important to point out is that this is also something that could have transitioned into the story. Nezha could have been one of the few figures that outright had a very dynamic background in Fate. Many times where you see a figure, whether it be mythological or historical, it's being told from their perspective, so it's often not gonna make them seem like they're the villain because usually they're just protecting what they have. In Nezha's case, it's a bit different in the sense that their existence is always one that was designed to waver. And this is a real missed opportunity in the story because it creates this sensation of a morally great character that isn't necessarily against you, but is always keeping you on your toes. I say it all the time, and people mention this also. One of the biggest assets to Rasuka is just his luck in general. His ability to communicate and make friends with nearly everybody he meets, which is not only unrealistic, but also literally impossible if this weren't FGO. Like, you're going to run into somebody where you can't see eye to eye with that person no matter what they do. And it doesn't take them destroying the world or destroying a lost belt for you to get there. And so Nezha could have been way more interesting if she kept that dynamic that wavered back and forth, so it kept Ritsuka on his toes to show him that not everybody is going to be on your side every single time. Not to say that she couldn't be on our side still, because that's what we want. I'm just saying, given the nature of her background, she's a dangerous ally to have because of that. It would be a lot like Kirei teaming up with Shiro at the end of Heaven's Field. Remember that dynamic? That was very interesting for multiple reasons, but one of which is that it shows that this person can still work together with their opposite if it's a situation that banks on them reaching the same goal. And so you might have Nezha on our side at times where it matters the most, and then you may have times where she just loses it. And we may possibly even have to figure out, is the massive amount of help that she's giving us worth keeping her on our side if she's putting an overall burden and danger on us all? And that's something that Ritsuka would have to figure out. And we've had remnants of that when she popped up as a Berserker in LB4. That would further make her showing up in that chapter make a lot more sense. We skip a little up ahead after Lady Rock tries to fight the Primordial in Nezha's place. The Fairy Primordial glanced down at Nezha, who peered outside the cave to head immediately to his family's residence due to the Jade Emperor's consensus of the Dragon King's request. In other words, the Dragon King snitched on him, thus telling Nezha what he should do during his arrival. The Fairy Primordial clapped his hands to put the irrational Lady Rock to her rest in a pit of flames. Approaching the 4 Dragon Kings, who arrived shortly at Nezha's house, Nezha began to break his own bones, gouge out his own intestines, and slit his belly as a representation of the punishment that he deserves, and the innocent that was deserving of his parents. Seeing Nezha dead in a large pool of blood, Guang and the other Dragon Kings consented to his sacrifice and declared his parents as innocent and free of any form of punishment. And this will be the end of his first life. He actually sacrificed himself for his family. And that's when we transition into the reincarnation, which is the version that Fate is supposed to be going by. The thing is, I know for a fact that Fate would never circle back around and give us the original Nezha, so it kind of misses out on a ton of potential when it does this. I would love for them to prove me wrong, but just given the trajectory of Nezha's character thus far, I'd have to see it to believe it. The soul of Nezha appeared before the Fairy Primordial recently after his death. The fairy told Nezha to approach his mother in a dream and tell her to construct a temple on Jade Scream Mountain that was to be worshipped with incense and candles for over 3 years of time. And this pretty much aligns with the time of his original pregnancy, kind of giving notice to him being that higher conception warrants that same amount of time again. Following the 3 years, Nezha would be able to reincarnate into his original human form once again. And this is where a lot of contention with his father sprung up, because while his mother wanted him to come back and address the temple as he said, his father felt like him being around was more trouble than what it was worth, especially when he was taking the damage for it. So his father burned the temple up. Li Jing noticed many individuals gathering around a neighboring temple that was supposedly dedicated to God Nezha. Burning the temple down shortly and calming the people with the truth, Li Jing returned immediately to his wife and reprimanded her for such one-sided thinking. Realizing that Nezha was to be reincarnated as soon as possible without a single moment of delay, the Fairy Primordial ordered his attendant to to retrieve 2 lotus flowers and 3 lotus leaves from the lotus pond immediately. Performing a special process with his lotus leaves and flowers shortly after being received, Nezha suddenly leapt forth in a new human body without the slightest defect following a puff of smoke. Bowing in unparalleled gratitude before his master, Nezha was trained immediately with the fire-tip lance combined with his new wind-fire wheels, and ended up mastering such an art in a very short amount of time. So looking at the depiction, and as we've already mentioned, Nezha does in fact have the lance and the wheels in Fate itself. Although I do really wish they made it a bigger deal than they put it out to be, because it is a really cool set, but they do have it at the very least. And so at that point, Nezha had went on an entire arc to hunt his father down for what he had done for not wanting him to come back. When he literally sacrificed himself, he practically atoned for his own sins as a child. Appearing before Muja, Nezha soon learned that the person standing before him was his second brother, and he thus told the latter his reason for such an action. Without any hesitation for sympathy on Nezha's part, due to unfilial behavior, Muja lashed his sword forth at the former, but only ended up being knocked in the stomach by Nezha's golden brick after leaving an opening. Nezha's golden brick, you can also add that to the list. He catches back up to his father, who in fact gets saved by another primordial. Running up to the man and hiding behind him, Nezha arrived shortly and explained the situation to this man, determined to vent his hatred. Giving in to Nezha's furiousness, the man spat on Li Jing. This part of the story has always been nasty to me, by the way. Spitting on somebody back? You a nasty motherfucker, man. The man spat on Li Jing and then clapped his hand to the former's back. As Li Jing was ordered by this man to fight back Nezha with little other choice, Nezha soon realized that his father's strength was now far greater than it was originally, and thus the man that was standing at the pine tree must be none other than a Taoist who was a master at the enhancement arts. Realizing that if he effectively destroyed the Taoist, his father's strength would not be surpassing his own, Nezha lunged forward and slashed his lance into the latter's forehead. The Taoist angrily unleashed forth his great golden pagoda from the heavens to trap the former within as punishment, clapping his hands to additionally signal a great fire to rage within the pagoda. Nezha had no choice but to beg for mercy and declare his acknowledgement to his father. Realizing that he possessed not a single burn from the Taoist's great fire, Nezha deduced the former's ability to be none other than a genjutsu. At that point, the Taoist goes on to teach his father the move in case at any point Nezha gets out of hand again. And this is good too, because this also could have been put into the background of Nezha and Fate, considering that we're trying to give Nezha more things and make the character more active. There also needs to be drawbacks, and that could be one of them. Nezha's weak to mental attacks, which is canonically true given this circumstance, and then others, just to balance it out. So to address a later portion of the Investiture of the Gods, because it is a collection of stories and he gets assigned to certain jobs. Being overrun by the enemy immortals Clear Renown, Yuhua unleashed forth his magical pennant, but such was only taken away by Nezha's leopard skin bag without the slightest effort. Also, can add that to the list. A leopard skin bag that can pillage items from the other wielder upon contact, unleashing forth his golden brick to gravely wound Yuhua, lest the latter attempted to kill the prisoners as a last resort in his desperate situation. He would then of course go on to free Yellow Flying Tiger, who was being held captive by commanders as his master requested. Then you have another commander. With Feng Ling's immediate departure before the city gates to offer challenge upon the realization of the boar's disappearance, Nezha approached the enemy commander while lashing violently with his renowned lance of fire. Feng retreated a grand distance lest he receive immediate death while shooting forth his ball of red flames at the former's face. Being naturally well acquainted with such sorcery, Nezha negated his technique while forcing Feng into retreat after being gravely injured with the universal colossal ring. He's got one commander running in a fatal position. He has another one doing the same thing. There's portions where he's taking on multiple of them at the same time and winning. By this point in time, the story is constantly saying that he's outright a celestial. Even in the profile, it tells us, to begin with, Nezha is not a human. Rather, she is an existence somewhat between a human and a Tsiah, or an immortal, born by making the Sentimani stone that the Tsiah of Mount Kulun, Tsiah, dropped on the world of mortals as her core. And of course, Tsiah is her master, or in other words, the fairy primordial. And I'll say it now, since we're already here, you have instances like where Xiang Yu is taking on our entire group and making them look bad because it's like 6 people versus him and they're struggling, when in actuality Xiang Yu is based on Nezha. It's Huang using the research of Nezha and multiplying that multiple times over. So it really should be flipped. It really should be Nezha doesn't even need help. You got Nezha a part of this group that seems incompetent, when really it really should be 8 versus Nezha. Huang himself, his humanoid body is also based around Nezha. If you go into the notes for LB3, which talks about what was going on before we got there, it goes into both of these. As previously established, Nezha was created in the Shang dynasty by Tsiah. According to Holmes, the over technology that created her had vanished by the Qing dynasty. However, the automata referred to as Xiang Yu greatly resembles her in construction, in Nezha's own opinion. She speculates that Xiang Yu was initially created in human form, closely approximating to her in performance. However, she believes that over time his body was gradually appended with extra limbs for purposes of motility in combat. The technology involved, however, is not of the same basis as the robotics achieved as of modernity in the greater history. Rather, it's founded in the Oriental sage arts. The generic humanoid automata employed by the first emperor in his military are a vast simplification of the tech that went into Xiang Yu, fabricated with normal materials rather than the fruition of the sage arts. Holmes speculates that the technology that went into Nezha may have been discovered by the first emperor, or Huang. More generally, the over technology exhibited within the Chinese Lost Belt might at large be a descendant of such. And so everything that you see, from Xiang Yu to the automata to the technological advances that are holding the entire Lost Belt afloat, to Huang himself, it literally tells you it's all descended down from Nezha. This is why it's irritating to watch. Knowing how good Nezha is, everything is coming from her. So why is she in the background in nearly every version like she's just barely good enough? Yes, they flirt with the idea quite a bit that she's extremely good. She could be good if she was summoned in this form. She has this phantasm, but it's sealed. If you were gonna give the person the phantasm just to seal it, why'd you give it to him? That's irritating and useless. It's either let her have her stuff or don't. But I find it funny that you're using her foundation to make everybody look good except her, even the Lost Belt King himself. Da Vinci gives that at the height of his initial reign, the first emperor perhaps came across the defunct remains of Nezha in one of the ruins left behind the Shang dynasty. Holmes poses thereafter that upon realizing what it was that he discovered, the emperor gave up his dream of seeking the elixir of immortality via alchemical means and the sage arts. And so when you consider this, Huang's immortality, the reason that he was able to survive this long, was better suited by taking from the background of Nezha. Nezha doesn't even have her own immortality. She should be one of the many servants that has this also. Again, just like Fion, the same way that Herc has his god hand, the same way that Achilles has his heel phantasm. As far as the gender bend, to begin with, he treated Nezha as a child that had yet to develop any secondary sexual characteristics. In other words, Nezha's body, after being revived, ended up being configured with a different gender from that of her previous life. But by then, it was already too late. This is the reason why Nezha displays an awkward attitude towards the topic of gender, even though she has pride on her own body's origins and performance. So even though they try to mask it with the idea that Nezha is genderless in the profile, it tells you here that it's basically a boy in a female's body, but she's so proud of her master that he just takes it in stride anyway and goes with being a female. Again, this doesn't really do anything. This is kind of just there. And speaking to the characteristics part, there are certain ethnic backgrounds, this one included, when they're young and they have long hair, before they get their actual masculine features, they do tend to look feminine. That's not untrue. The strange part for me comes in when the whole reason that you did this was to parrot a boy as a female for monetary gain. That's the weird shit. Has no reason to be there other than that. But I've already said before, the gender bend isn't gonna make or break the character. The character is going to make or break the character. Nezha could have been a whole man, and if he's still sitting in the background doing nothing, then they're all one and the same. I just wanted to shed some light on this, and what they got going on here is completely useless. They put a lot of effort into giving some bullshit reason why they swapped the gender when they should have been focusing on the background itself. You skip up ahead in Investiture of the Gods. You have another fight with Nezha. Zhang Lun deployed his beams of light consecutively, but alas, for it did not have any effect on Nezha whatsoever. Being stricken with fear at his trump card being of lack, Nezha impatiently thrust forward his universal ring, breaking the bones within Zhang Lun's back and forcing his soldiers to assist him into retreat. So you have yet another commander who's literally using light beams multiple times, and Nezha is tanking them and crushing him in one blow. And don't get me wrong, Nezha isn't impenetrable. There is a portion where even Nezha gets caught by surprise and he has to be taken to get healed. As Chang Yu began to flee in feigned defeat, Nezha pursued, but to his detriment, the former casted forth a golden pebble with her hand at quick speed, wounding Nezha severely in the eyes and nose, forcing him to retreat back to the city immediately. Tsiah, who began to ridicule Nezha for being hurt by a mere pebble despite the celestial attributes that he supposedly possesses. And the golden pebble, just like Nezha's brick, is supernatural. That doesn't make it any less hilarious, but I say that to bring up the fact that Nezha isn't unbeatable, and I don't want to make it appear as if he is. But even in the original, with him having all his things, they made it work, and they also made him susceptible to this type of damage even on a lower scale. And that just goes to show there's no reason that the same thing couldn't have been done here. And Nezha naturally was pissed off. He wanted his get back bad. And that's where he ended up running into the commander with the beams of light and running straight through him. He really caught a stray because he's already mad. And honestly, this whole battle that Nezha's master has him in, there's a lot going on. You got dudes shooting beams, dudes getting knocked by golden pebbles, people out here transforming, commanders with nails that penetrate through your heart. And so the whole thing is that somebody gets the upper hand and then another person gets them. You even had one of his enemies try to flat out take Nezha's soul, and he ate it. Ying Hong furiously charged his halberd into Nezha's body with many thrusts as he continuously attempted to steal the latter's soul with the yin yang mirror to no avail. So most people have abilities. He's getting impaled multiple times and he's just tanking it. Tried to siphon his soul, still tanked it. You had another one of Nezha's opponents. When they beat one of Nezha's comrades, they actually hung his body on the wall to make a point, and this pissed Nezha off severely because he felt like he didn't deserve that. One of the people that he ran into then, Qiyu Ying, who literally has an armament that makes you fall asleep. Nezha tanked that. Qiyu Ying would wave a mysterious red pearl in his face, which would instantly encourage drowsiness. Unfortunately for Qiyu Ying, however, his red pearl would have no effect on Nezha and would only result in him fleeing with broken bones. And so going back into the genjutsu, even mental attacks would have to come from a higher level or a higher being for them to actively work. or as it's shown, Nezha is just straight up tanking it. When he reached a certain level of rage, people are coming at him and they're getting bopped bad. Tsiah tried his soul snatching banner to capture Thunderquaker, but when he waved it on Nezha, Nezha not only was not affected, but he also struck the back of Tsiah. Tries to use these effects on Nezha again. It didn't work. Then he fights a dragon. Nezha asked Tsiah to let him fight with Dragon Anji. Nezha was unsusceptible to the magic noise. He struck the head of the dragon and killed him. Dragon Anji had a pair of magic circles which could make noise to confuse the enemy and then bind his hands, which was supposed to send Nezha into confusion. Ate that and then killed another dragon. It's all over. Back when it told us that Nezha's body was free of defects. The next day, all the soldiers and generals had chickenpox on their body. 3 days later, they were all lying in bed. Nezha and Yang were the only two not affected. So during the creation of Nezha, they weren't kidding when they said that he shrugs things like this off. Spells, diseases, soul-snatching attacks. Here's another. Thus his son, Beyond G, countermeasured a 10,000 skeletons banner before the gate. If his rivals hunted him and passed under it, they would lose their consciousness. Nezha's group passed under it, and everybody got affected except him and was able to strike Beyond. A lot like the pagoda from the Taoists earlier, Nezha also had his own flame imbued trap. The hate of Zhang at Yang Bliss now was boiling about. It was the opportunity to Nezha who reached Zhang and used his 9-dragon fire shade to wrap Zhang and burn him. That is the great bulk of what happened in the war. And then we move over to where fate is pulling the rest of Nezha's background, that being the journey to the west with Sanzo and Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong, as you know, being touted as one of the greatest figures in Chinese myth. They are claimed to be rivaled and on the same level. If you look at Nezha's bond, according to Nezha herself, boasting the military achievement of sealing away the apparition of Dong, she is the greatest rival of the great sage equal to heaven, Sun Wukong. Or so she thinks. And then in the journey to the west, you do have multiple events where they get together and even some where they work alongside one another. When he put on his armor and helmet, Prince Nezha charged straight out of the camp to the Water Curtain Cave. Sun Wukong, who was just going to pull back his troops, saw the ferocity of his onslaught. Sun Wukong went up to him and asked, "Whose little boy are you then? What do you mean charging up to my door?" "Stinking monkey fiend," shouted Prince Nezha. "Don't you know who I am? I am Nezha, the third son of the pagoda-bearing heavenly king, and I have been commanded by the Jade Emperor to come here and arrest you." Which at that point, Sun Wukong gets to talking crazy himself. "You do talk big, don't you, little prince?" said Sun Wukong, laughing at him. "But as you still got all your milk teeth and are still wet behind the ears, I'll spare your life and won't hit you. Go tell the Jade Emperor that if he gives me that title, I'll call off my armies and submit to him once more." He says if the Jade Emperor, which is pretty much the sovereign, the one that's over everybody, gives him his title, then he might consider holding off. And Nezha says, "Oh yeah, we gotta deal with you." So Nezha changes into a new form. "Change," yelled Nezha in a passion, and at once he had 3 heads and 6 arms, which made him look most ferocious. In his hand he held 6 weapons: a demon beheading sword, a demon hacking cutlass, a demon binding rope, a demon quelling pestle, an embroidered ball, and a fire wheel. And wielding all of these, he rushed straight at Sun Wukong. At the sight of him, Sun Wukong exclaimed with astonishment, "Well, my boy, you certainly know a trick or two." It was a great fight, and it made the earth shake and the mountains tremble. And at that point, Sun Wukong turned into his own version of the same form that Nezha went into. Prince Nezha and Sun Wukong both used their divine powers to the full as they fought for 30 rounds. When the 6 weapons of the prince turned into thousands and 10,000s, so did Sun Wukong's gold banded cudgel, the same cudgels or the staffs that Wukong was using to fend off Nezha's attacks. Now I want to stop this right here. Shapeshifting. Nezha can completely turn her body into another form entirely. And you'll find if you look at her profile, she does have this. And guess what? It's sealed. The overarching immortal beast. Nezha's rage together with the soul of a great overarching immortal from her previous existence, both which dwells within her, can allow her to enlarge to a size 6 times bigger than her normal size. She transforms into a multi-faced, multi-armed divine beast, having a specialized noble phantasm at the ready in every hand she opens with an intense offense and defense. Where is this in the story? Nowhere to be found. And I will say she's not the only one that's victim to this. There are a lot of servants with phantasms that are just sitting there. Even if they are in the profile, they never get touched story-wise. So they're kind of just there existing for nothing. But as you can see in Journey to the West, and something that Fate doesn't mention, it takes this a step further to say that Nezha can multiply her weapons to tens of thousands at will. And so here you have Nezha going toe to toe with Sun Wukong. He is one of the greatest figures of the Eastern world, literally. And so for Nezha to even contend with him on that same level, and not only that, she technically has a fraction of his ability and still went 30 rounds with him, getting even his praise. At this point, Wukong had Nezha running back to his dad, telling him how strong he was, but he did do great for what it was. When it comes to the Nezhas that appear in LB4, that also being her Berserker version, this is what I meant earlier about it would have been a better thing that if back in LB3, she had herself wavering between those two sides. But even with her Berserker version in LB4, her original form does talk about how being this powerful puts a strain on her body, yet when her Berserker version got the authority from God Juna, this helped release more of that, but it also came at the expense of her sanity, which in turn, considering that she already didn't have dialogue or much of a consistent thought pattern to begin with, it only ends up taking away. She does have a conscience. You can tell, despite the fact that her speech pattern is fragmented, she's very precise about what she says. I do like the blend between her foundation and the Indian counterpart to her father being placed inside of her, but at the same time, I don't like the fact that it took away from who she was, especially considering that she now has the authority within her. Even though she's in the Berserker class, that authority should override this and still give her beyond the conversations what we saw. There also should be more perspective from her side when she's in that Berserker form to even make it worth it. I will give them the credit to say that the foundation that they use was good enough. She doesn't have all of her things, but she does have enough to make an impact, and she's accurate enough in the armaments that they did give her to say that it is truly Nezha. I just wanted to see them capitalize more on that. If you were going to do anything that would extend Nezha beyond her original self, the dialogue will be the forefront of elevating her character, much because by just turning her into a fighting machine, you kind of just copy paste what happened most of the time in the myth. And honestly, she's way better in the myth. So if you were just gonna copy paste, you could have just read the myths and got a way better version. In terms of what she's missing, her golden brick, her fire trap spell, her invisibility, her bow, which again, I'm fine with since she isn't an archer, but her Berserker form definitely could have had this. Her dust cloud, her immortality, her actually using the shape-shifting technique instead of just having it, her leopard skin bag that pillages items, her being able to use tens of thousands of weapons like in Journey to the West, so on and so forth.